Oh my god. I genuinely don't want to talk about what's going to happen in this video. Dude, these creepers are a nightmare for me. At this point, I swear I feel like smashing my PC. Anyway, while this video plays, I'm going to read some Reddit stories. You can do your thing and enjoy. Okay, first story. This story comes from a 31-year-old woman who discovered that her entire childhood was built on a lie, and the truth destroyed her relationship with her mother forever. She grew up in a small town with her mom and her older brother. Her father had supposedly died in a car accident when she was 2 years old, before she had any real memories of him. Her mom rarely talked about him, said it was too painful, and she respected that. There were a few photos around the house, a wedding picture on the mantle, some old snapshots in the albums. Her mom would occasionally tell stories about how much her dad loved them, how devastated she was when he died, how hard it was to raise 2 kids alone. She built her entire identity around being the daughter of a man who died tragically young. She'd visit his grave every year on the anniversary of his death with her mom and brother. She'd leave flowers, tell him about her life, feel that bittersweet connection to someone she never really knew. When she was 30, her brother got engaged. During the wedding planning, her future sister-in-law was putting together one of those family tree displays that some people do at weddings. She asked for information about their dad so she could include him. Birth date, full name, details for the display. That's when things started unraveling. Her brother realized he didn't actually know their dad's birth date. They knew the death date, had it memorized from years of cemetery visits, but neither of them knew when he was born. So she decided to request a copy of his birth certificate, thinking it would be a nice thing to have anyway. The records office came back saying they had no record of anyone by that name born in the year her mom had always told them. She thought maybe it was an error, maybe he was born in a different state, so she started digging deeper. She requested his death certificate to at least confirm that information. The death certificate existed, but when she read it, her entire world tilted. The man who died in that car accident was real, but he wasn't her father. The death certificate listed him as unmarried, no children. She cross-referenced with marriage records. He'd never been married to her mom. She was confused and panicking. She looked at those wedding photos again, really looked at them, and realized she'd never actually studied the man's face that carefully. She'd just accepted it was her dad, but now, looking closely, she wasn't sure. The photos were conveniently always slightly blurry or at an angle. She confronted her mother with the death certificate, and after some initial denial, her mom finally broke down and admitted the truth. That man wasn't their father. Their actual father was someone her mom had an affair with while she was engaged to someone else. When she got pregnant, the affair partner wanted nothing to do with being a father. He was married, had his own family, and threatened to disappear completely if she tried to involve him. Her mom had been desperate and ashamed, so she created an elaborate lie. She found an obituary of a man who died young in a car accident, someone with no close family, and built an entire fake history. She created the wedding photos using pictures of herself with an ex-boyfriend, someone from before she got pregnant, someone who'd moved away and lost touch. She made up stories, fabricated memories, and maintained this fiction for nearly 30 years. The man they'd been visiting at the cemetery? A complete stranger. Every story about their dad? Fiction. Every tear her mom cried at that gravestone? Performance. She demanded to know who their real father was. Her mom admitted it was a man who still lived 2 towns over, someone she'd occasionally see around but never speak to. A man with a whole other family who had no idea she and her brother existed. Her brother was devastated when she told him. They decided together to reach out to their biological father, needing answers. Needing to understand, they found him on social media and sent a carefully worded message explaining who they were. His response was cold and legal. He denied everything at first, then when she offered to do a DNA test, he admitted it might be possible, but said he wanted nothing to do with them. He had 3 other kids, a wife of 25 years, and their existence would destroy his family. He asked them, essentially begged them, to leave him alone and never contact him again, so she and her brother were left with this horrifying truth. Their mother had lied to them for their entire lives. Their biological father wanted nothing to do with them. The man they'd mourned and visited and built their identities around never knew they existed. Her relationship with her mother imploded. She couldn't look at her the same way. Every childhood memory was now tainted with the knowledge that her mom had been lying the entire time. Her brother tried to maintain a relationship with their mom, said she'd done her best in a difficult situation, but she couldn't forgive it. The lies were too big, too fundamental. Her mom kept trying to explain, saying she did it to protect them, to give them a father figure even if he was imaginary, to avoid the shame of admitting the truth, but all she could think about was the decades of deception. The fake grief, the manipulation of making them visit a stranger's grave, and mourn someone who meant nothing to them. She hasn't spoken to her mother in over a year now. Her brother's wedding happened, and she and her mom were civil, but distant. Her brother is still trying to play mediator, but she's told him she needs space from their mother. Maybe forever. The worst part is the identity crisis. She spent 30 years thinking she knew who she was, where she came from, what her family history looked like. All of that was fiction. She's had to reconstruct her entire understanding of herself, and it's been devastating. Some people tell her she should forgive her mom, that she was a single mother doing her best. Others say the lie was unforgivable. She honestly doesn't know. All she knows is that the secret destroyed whatever family they had, and she's not sure anything can be rebuilt from the ashes. This one comes from a 28-year-old man who discovered his sister wasn't actually his sister, and the truth revealed a dark family conspiracy that had been maintained for over 2 decades. He grew up with his younger sister, Emma, who was 3 years younger than him. They were typical siblings, fought sometimes, but were generally close. Their parents were loving but a bit strict, especially his dad. Extended family gatherings were normal. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, the whole thing. When he was 25, his father died suddenly from a heart attack. It was devastating for the whole family, but they got through it together. A few months after the funeral, while helping his mom sort through his dad's papers and belongings, he found a locked file box in the back of his dad's office closet. He asked his mom what it was, and she got this strange look on her face. She said she didn't know, that it was his dad's private stuff and they should probably just throw it away without opening it. But something about her reaction made him curious. The box wasn't that secure, just a small keyed lock, and he ended up prying it open later when his mom wasn't around. Inside were documents, legal papers, old letters, and a file folder labeled with his sister's name. What he found inside made him physically sick. Emma wasn't his biological sister. She wasn't even adopted through normal channels. The documents told an insane story. When he was 3 years old, his parents had been trying to have another baby, but his mom had suffered multiple miscarriages. She'd become severely depressed, and his dad was desperate to help her. Around that time, his dad's younger brother, his Uncle Mark, had gotten a girl pregnant. She was young, unstable, not ready to be a mother. Uncle Mark was also a mess, had substance issues, was in and out of jail. The girl wanted to give the baby up for adoption, but the family was apparently ashamed of the situation. So his dad made a deal. He and his mom would take the baby and raise it as their own. They'd tell everyone his mom was pregnant, she'd wear maternity clothes even though she wasn't actually pregnant, and when the time came, they'd have the baby, and no one would know the difference. The biological mother would sign away her rights, Uncle Mark would stay away, and the family secret would be buried. That's exactly what happened. His mom faked a pregnancy. Emma was born, and his parents brought her home as their biological daughter. Emma's actual mother was paid off and disappeared. Uncle Mark was told to never speak of it and never try to contact Emma. The documents included the original birth certificate with the real mother's name and Uncle Mark listed as father. There were legal agreements, signed contracts, even some letters between his dad and Uncle Mark discussing the arrangement. He was in shock. His sister, the person he'd grown up with, wasn't who he thought she was, and apparently no one was going to tell her. His dad had kept these documents locked away, maybe as insurance, maybe as a record, but clearly never intended for anyone to find them. He confronted his mom. She broke down crying, admitted everything. She said they did it because they desperately wanted another child, and this seemed like it was helping everyone. The baby would have a stable home, his uncle would avoid the responsibility he wasn't ready for, the biological mother could move on with her life, and she'd get to be a mother again. She begged him not to tell Emma, said it would destroy her, that she'd been Emma's real mother in every way that mattered, that the biology was irrelevant. But he couldn't let it go. Emma had a right to know, and more importantly, Uncle Mark was still around. He saw Uncle Mark at family gatherings. Uncle Mark would talk to Emma, his own biological daughter, and pretend to just be her uncle. It felt sick and wrong. He told his mom he was going to tell Emma, and his mom threatened him, said it would tear the family apart, that Emma would hate them all, that he was being selfish. But he felt like keeping the secret was even more selfish. So he told Emma. He sat her down, showed her the documents, and explained everything as gently as he could. Emma's reaction was worse than he could have imagined. She didn't cry at first. She just went quiet, completely shut down. Then she started asking questions. Who was her real mother? Where was she? Did Uncle Mark know? Had everyone been lying to her for her entire life? The answer to that last question was yes. The entire extended family knew. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, everyone had been maintaining this lie for 25 years. Every family gathering, every holiday, every birthday, they'd all been in on it while Emma lived in ignorance. Emma cut off contact with their mom immediately. She confronted Uncle Mark, who admitted it but said he'd done what was best for everyone by staying away. Emma didn't accept that. She wanted to know about her biological mother and spent months trying to track her down. She eventually found her. The woman was living in a different state, had gotten married, had 2 other kids, and had apparently never told her husband about Emma. When Emma reached out, the woman denied everything at first, then admitted it, but said she'd moved on and didn't want Emma in her life. She said she'd made the choice to give Emma up and that decision was final. Emma was rejected by both her biological parents and felt betrayed by the people who raised her. She spiraled into severe depression. She moved to a different city, cut off most of the family, and started therapy to process the trauma of finding out her entire identity was a lie. The family fell apart. His mom blamed him for telling Emma, said he destroyed the family for no reason. The extended family picked sides. Some said Emma deserved to know the truth. Others said he should have kept the secret and let Emma live in peace. Uncle Mark stopped coming to family events altogether. Now, 3 years later, Emma still barely speaks to any of them. She talks to him occasionally, says she doesn't blame him for telling her, but wishes she'd never found out. She says ignorance was better than this painful truth. His mom and Emma haven't had a real conversation in years. The family gatherings that used to be warm and full of love are now tense and awkward, with half the family not even showing up. He thinks about those documents all the time. If he'd just thrown away that box like his mom suggested, Emma would still be happy. The family would still be intact. But Emma would also be living a lie. He still doesn't know if he made the right choice. The secret destroyed his family, but keeping it felt wrong. There's no good answer, and he has to live with the consequences of choosing truth over peace. This story comes from a 42-year-old woman who discovered that her entire family's wealth was built on a crime, and exposing it cost her everything. She grew up upper middle class, comfortable but not extravagantly wealthy. Her father owned a successful construction business that his father had started back in the 60s. The family had a good reputation in their community, were involved in charity work, the whole thing. Her dad was respected, her grandfather had been beloved before he died, and she was proud of her family legacy. When her father passed away from cancer, he left behind a complicated will. The business was to be sold, with the proceeds split between her and her 2 brothers. But there was also a piece of property that her father owned separately. A piece of land out in a rural area that had been in the family for decades. The will specified that this land was to go to her specifically, and included a note that said, "You'll understand why when you see what's there." She was confused but didn't think much of it initially. She was grieving, dealing with the business sale, managing her father's estate. A few months after the funeral, she finally drove out to this property to see what her father was talking about. The land was undeveloped, just empty acreage with an old storage shed on it. Inside the shed, she found filing cabinets full of documents. And what she discovered in those documents made her realize her entire family history was a lie. The documents detailed decades of fraud, bribery, and illegal activity that her grandfather and then her father had been involved in. Back in the 60s and 70s, her grandfather's construction company had won numerous government contracts to build public housing, schools, and municipal buildings. But the documents showed that almost every single one of those contracts had been obtained through bribes to city officials. There were ledgers showing cash payments to city council members, mayors, zoning board officials. There were forged inspection reports where buildings that didn't meet safety codes were passed anyway. There were documents showing that her grandfather had used substandard materials, pocketed the difference, and bribed inspectors to look the other way. Some of those buildings were still standing, schools that kids attended, low-income housing where families lived, and according to these documents, they'd been built with cheaper materials than contracted, with safety shortcuts, with violations that were covered up. But it got worse. There was evidence that one of those buildings, a public housing complex built in 1974, had partially collapsed 3 years after construction. 2 people had died. The official investigation had blamed it on a gas leak, but these documents told a different story. The collapse was due to structural failures from the substandard construction. Her grandfather had paid off investigators and witnesses to blame the gas company instead. Her grandfather had essentially gotten away with causing 2 deaths, and then her father had inherited the business and continued some of the practices, though apparently on a smaller scale. Her father had been laundering the old bribery money through legitimate business deals for years, cleaning up her grandfather's crimes while keeping the evidence locked away. She sat in that shed reading these documents for hours, feeling physically ill. Every nice thing she'd had growing up, her education, her childhood home, all of it had been paid for with dirty money. Money obtained through bribes and fraud. Money that was connected to people's deaths. She didn't know what to do. Her first instinct was to burn it all, pretend she'd never seen it, and move on with her life. Her father was dead. Her grandfather was long dead. What good would exposing it do now? But those buildings were still standing. People were still living and working in structures that might not be safe, and the families of those 2 people who died in 1974 deserved to know the truth. She spent 2 weeks agonizing over the decision. She talked to a lawyer, confidentially, who told her that exposing this could open up massive liability issues. The statute of limitations on some of the crimes had passed, but civil suits could still be filed. Wrongful death claims could potentially still be brought against the estate. She could lose everything. She also thought about her brothers. They had families, kids in college, mortgages. If this came out and the estate got sued into oblivion, they'd lose their inheritance too. And they had no idea any of this existed. Was it fair to destroy their financial security over crimes they didn't commit? But she kept thinking about those 2 people who died. About their families being told it was a gas leak when it was actually negligent construction. About all the people currently living in potentially unsafe buildings. She made copies of everything and went to the authorities. She turned over all the documents to the district attorney's office, explained what she'd found, and braced for impact. The fallout was nuclear. The story made national news. Investigative journalists dug into every project her grandfather's company had ever built. Engineers were sent to inspect those old buildings. Several were found to have serious structural issues and had to be evacuated and demolished. The cost ran into the tens of millions. The families of the 2 people who died in 1974 filed wrongful death suits against her father's estate. Other residents of the buildings filed class action lawsuits. The total liability exceeded the entire value of the estate by a massive margin. Her inheritance was gone. Her brother's inheritances were gone. Everything her father left behind was seized to pay settlements and legal fees, and it still wasn't enough. Her family name became synonymous with corruption and fraud in their community, but the personal cost was even higher. Her brothers cut her off completely. They said she destroyed their lives over something that happened before they were born, something they had no control over. Her older brother had to take his kids out of private school. Her younger brother lost his house because he'd been counting on the inheritance to pay off his mortgage. Her extended family sided with her brothers. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all of them blamed her for airing the family's dirty laundry. They said she should have kept quiet, that exposing dead men's crimes helped no one. At family gatherings she's no longer invited to, they apparently referred to her as the traitor who destroyed the family. Her own children struggled with the revelation. They'd been proud of their family name, proud of their great-grandfather's business legacy. Finding out it was all built on fraud and corruption, that their family wealth came from bribes and cost people their lives, was traumatic for them. Her teenage daughter was bullied at school when the story broke. Kids called her family criminals and murderers. Her marriage nearly fell apart. Her husband was furious that she'd made the decision to go to authorities without consulting him first, since it affected his financial future too. They went to counseling and managed to stay together, but the trust was damaged. The DA's office praised her for coming forward, called her a hero for prioritizing truth and justice over personal gain. But that praise felt empty when she was attending her daughter's therapy sessions or watching her brother's families struggle financially. Some of the families who'd been living in those unsafe buildings thanked her. One woman told her that the building she'd been living in was found to have such serious structural damage that it likely would have collapsed within a few years, potentially killing dozens. That woman said she'd saved lives by coming forward, but she still doesn't know if she made the right choice. Yes, she exposed crimes and potentially prevented future tragedies. But she also destroyed her family, took away her brother's financial security, and traumatized her own children. The crimes weren't hers, but the consequences of exposing them fell heavily on innocent people. Now, 5 years later, she's rebuilt a relationship with one of her brothers. Though it's strained, the other still won't speak to her, her extended family still blames her, she's had to start over financially, working a regular job after years of comfortable living. She thinks about that shed all the time. Wonders what would have happened if she'd just burned those documents and walked away. Part of her wishes she had, but another part knows that those unsafe buildings needed to be found, that the truth about those deaths deserved to come out, even decades later. The secret destroyed her family, but keeping it might have eventually cost lives. And she has to live with that impossible choice forever. This story comes from a 35-year-old man who discovered he was a twin, and finding out why his twin was kept secret from him destroyed his relationship with his parents forever. He was born premature, spent time in the NICU as a baby, but ultimately turned out healthy and fine. His parents had always told him he was their miracle baby, that they'd struggled to have children and he was their only one. Growing up as an only child was sometimes lonely, but he had a good childhood overall. When he was 33, he decided to do one of those DNA ancestry tests, mostly just for fun, curious about his ethnic background and family history. He sent in his sample and forgot about it for a few weeks. When the results came back, the ancestry information was interesting but unremarkable, but there was a notification that he had a DNA match for a close relative. The website indicated it was a sibling-level match, someone who shared approximately 50% of his DNA. He was confused. He was an only child. He reached out to this DNA match through the website's messaging system, asking if they might be related and explaining that he'd been told he was an only child, but the DNA suggested otherwise. The response he got back was shocking. The person on the other end was a woman, his age, same birthday, who'd also been told she was an only child. She lived across the country. They video called, and the resemblance was undeniable. They had the same eyes, similar facial structure, same mannerisms. They were twins. Fraternal twins who'd been separated at birth and neither had been told. He immediately called his parents demanding an explanation. His mother broke down crying. His father tried to deflect at first, but eventually they admitted the truth. He and his twin sister had both been born extremely premature, each with serious health complications. The doctors had told his parents that both babies might not survive, and if they did, they'd likely have significant disabilities and require intensive care for years. His parents had been young, early 20s, with very little money. They were terrified and overwhelmed. A social worker apparently suggested that if the babies did survive, his parents might consider placing one or both for adoption with families who had more resources to handle the medical needs. Both babies survived against the odds. He recovered well and relatively quickly. His sister had a longer, more complicated recovery with more ongoing health issues. The medical bills were already catastrophic, and the doctor said his sister would need years of continued treatment, therapy, and specialized care. His parents made a decision. They kept him, the healthier twin, and placed his sister for adoption. They told themselves it was for the best, that his sister would get better care with a family who could afford it, that splitting them up gave both babies a better chance at a good life. His sister was adopted by a wealthy family who could afford her medical care. She grew up healthy, successful, with parents who loved her and gave her every opportunity. But she'd always known she was adopted and had eventually done the DNA test hoping to find biological family. He was furious with his parents. They'd let him grow up thinking he was an only child when he had a twin sister out there. They'd made a choice to keep one baby and give away the other like they were picking a puppy from a litter. And they'd maintained this lie for 33 years. His parents tried to justify it, said they were young and scared, that they truly believed they were doing what was best for both children, that they'd been told by doctors and social workers that they couldn't handle two medically fragile infants. His mother said she'd thought about his sister every single day, had cried about the decision for years, but believed his sister was better off with the family who adopted her. But what made it unforgivable for him was finding out that his parents had updates over the years. The adoption had been semi-open initially, and they'd received photos and updates about his sister until she was about 5 years old. They'd known she was healthy, happy, thriving, and they still never told him. Even when it became clear that both children were fine, that the worst-case scenarios hadn't happened, they maintained the lie. He developed a relationship with his twin sister. They started talking regularly, visited each other, tried to build the sibling relationship they'd been denied. She was angry at their biological parents too, but she'd had a good life with her adoptive family and didn't feel as betrayed. She'd always known she was adopted, so finding out about him was a happy surprise, not a devastating revelation, but for him, everything about his identity had shifted. He'd been half of a pair his entire life and never knew it. His parents had made a choice about his life without his input, a choice that affected him deeply. His relationship with his parents deteriorated rapidly. He couldn't look at them the same way. Every childhood memory was tainted with the knowledge that they'd given away his twin and lied about it. Family photos where he was alone felt wrong now, knowing someone should have been there beside him. His mother kept trying to apologize, saying they'd done what they thought was right at the time, that they were practically kids themselves when they made that decision. His father was more defensive, said they'd given his sister a better life than they could have provided, and he should be grateful he got to grow up with parents who kept him. That last comment destroyed whatever relationship they had left. The implication that he should be grateful they chose to keep him, like he'd won some kind of lottery, made him sick. He stopped speaking to his parents entirely. His twin sister tried to mediate, said everyone made mistakes and his parents had been in an impossible situation, but he couldn't forgive it. Not the initial decision, which maybe he could understand on some level, but the decades of lying after. All the times he'd said he wished he had a sibling. All the times his parents could have told him the truth and chose not to. His parents ended up meeting his twin sister, which felt surreal and painful for everyone. His sister was kind to them, thanked them for making the adoption decision because she'd had a wonderful life, but he couldn't be in the same room with them anymore. Now, 2 years later, he has a close relationship with his twin sister. They talk almost every day, visit regularly, and are trying to make up for lost time. Her adoptive parents have welcomed him into their family, which is bittersweet because they're better at being family to him than his own parents are. He hasn't spoken to his biological parents in over a year. They send messages on holidays that he doesn't respond to. His extended family thinks he's being too harsh, that he should forgive them. But he can't. The secret of his twin destroyed his family, but finding her gave him something he'd been missing his whole life. He just wishes he'd known sooner. Wishes he'd had 33 years with his sister instead of just 2, and he can't forgive his parents for taking that time away from both of them. This story comes from a 24-year-old woman who discovered she was the product of an affair, and the revelation destroyed not 1, but 2 families. She grew up thinking her family was normal. Mom, dad, her, and her younger brother. Her parents seemed happy enough, had a solid marriage, celebrated anniversaries, the whole thing. Her dad worked in finance, traveled sometimes for work, but was generally present and involved. When she was 23, her dad died in a random accident, hit by a drunk driver while crossing the street. It was sudden and devastating. The whole family was shattered. A few weeks after the funeral, a woman showed up at their house. She was around her mom's age, visibly upset, and asked to speak to her mother privately. Her mom looked like she'd seen a ghost but let the woman in. They talked in the kitchen with the door closed for over an hour while she and her brother waited awkwardly in the living room. When the woman left, her mom was pale and shaking. She called both her and her brother into the kitchen and told them they needed to talk. The woman who just left was named Diane, and Diane had also been in a relationship with their father. For 18 years, he'd been living a complete double life. Her dad had another family, another house in a town 40 minutes away, another partner who he spent half his time with. Diane had thought they were in a committed relationship, basically common law married, though they'd never made it legal. And Diane had a daughter, a 17-year-old girl who was also their father's child. Her dad had been splitting his time between 2 families for nearly 2 decades. When he told her mom he was traveling for work, sometimes he was actually just going to his other house. He'd created an elaborate system of lies that let him maintain both relationships simultaneously. Diane had found out about them when she'd been going through his things after he died. She discovered documents, photos, evidence of his entire other life. And she'd come to confront her mom, thinking maybe her mom had known and been complicit. But her mom had no idea either. Both women had been completely deceived. Her mom had been married to a man who was essentially living with someone else half the time. Diane had been in a relationship with a man who had a whole secret family. And there were now 3 children who just found out their father was not who they thought he was. The revelation destroyed her mom. She'd loved her dad, mourned him, and now had to process that their entire marriage had been a lie. Every time he'd said he loved her, he was also saying it to someone else. Every anniversary, every family vacation, all of it was happening while he maintained another family. But then things got even more complicated. Her mom's parents, her grandparents, had helped her parents buy their house years ago. They'd contributed a significant amount of money as a gift. When her dad died, the house was in both her parents' names, so it would go to her mom. But Diane claimed that her dad had promised her the house after he died, had told her it would be hers. Diane had financial problems and desperately needed somewhere to live with her daughter. She implied she might take legal action to claim part of the estate. Then there was the issue of her dad's life insurance. He had a policy through work that named her mom as the beneficiary, but he also had a separate private policy that named Diane as the beneficiary. Neither woman had known about the other policy. The two families ended up in a painful, messy legal situation. Lawyers got involved. Her mom was trying to protect what she thought was rightfully hers after being married for 25 years. Diane was arguing that she'd been in a committed relationship just as long and deserved to be treated as a spouse. She and her brother were caught in the middle. They had a half-sister they'd never met, a 17-year-old girl who'd just lost her dad and found out he'd been lying to her for her entire life. She reached out to her half-sister, feeling like they needed to connect since none of this was their fault. The girl's name was Riley, and talking to her was surreal. They looked somewhat alike, had similar mannerisms from their shared genetics and shared father. Riley was angry at their dad, but also grieving. She said he'd been a good father to her, present and loving, and now she didn't know what was real. She thought her mom and dad just didn't believe in traditional marriage. She'd had no idea he was actually married to someone else. Meeting Riley made everything more complicated emotionally. This wasn't just abstract drama, it was real people who'd been hurt. Her mom hated that she was building a relationship with Riley and Diane, felt like it was a betrayal, but Riley was her sister and none of this was Riley's fault. The legal battles dragged on for months. Eventually, they reached a settlement. Her mom kept the house but had to split some of the financial assets with Diane. The life insurance policies went to their respective beneficiaries as originally designated. It wasn't fair to anyone, but it was the best resolution they could manage. The emotional damage, though, couldn't be settled in court. Her mom became bitter and depressed, felt like her entire adult life had been a waste. Her younger brother started having anger issues, acting out because he didn't know how to process the betrayal. Her grandparents were devastated, felt guilty for helping buy a house for a man who'd been deceiving their daughter. Diane struggled financially even after the settlement and ended up moving to a different state to live with relatives. Riley stayed in touch with her though, and they've built a genuine sibling relationship despite the circumstances. The worst part was not being able to properly grieve her dad. She was sad he was gone, but also furious at him for what he'd done. How could someone maintain such an elaborate lie? How could he look at her mom every day and pretend to be a faithful husband? How could he do the same to Diane? She loved her dad, but now she didn't know if the man she'd loved was even real or if he'd been performing his entire life. Now, a year and a half later, her mom still hasn't recovered emotionally. She's in therapy but struggling. She refuses to acknowledge Riley's existence, which creates tension because she wants her sister in her life. Her brother is doing better but still has trust issues with everyone. The secret of her dad's double life destroyed two families and created chaos that's still being dealt with. Every memory of her dad is now complicated and painful, and she has to live with the knowledge that the man she thought was a devoted father was actually just a skilled liar. She has a sister she never knew about, which is a silver lining, but the cost of that discovery was enormous. This final story is from a 26-year-old man who discovered something in his deceased grandmother's basement that revealed a family history of abuse and secrets that had been buried for over 50 years. His grandmother died at age 87, and he was helping his mom clean out her house to prepare it for sale. His grandmother had lived in the same house for over 60 years, and the basement was packed with decades of accumulated stuff. Boxes, old furniture, random junk that needed to be sorted through. He was going through boxes in a corner of the basement when he found a locked trunk pushed behind some old filing cabinets. The lock was rusted and broke easily when he pried at it. Inside was a collection of items that seemed random at first. Old newspapers, some jewelry, a few pieces of children's clothing, and a thick stack of letters and journals. He started reading the journals out of curiosity, thinking they might be interesting family history. What he found was horrifying. The journals belonged to his grandmother and spanned from the early 1960s to the late 1970s. They documented years of severe abuse by his grandfather, who died when he was a baby, and who he'd only ever heard described as a good man who died too young. The journals described physical violence, controlling behavior, financial abuse, and psychological torture. His grandmother wrote about being isolated from her family, being prevented from working, being beaten for minor perceived infractions. She wrote about living in constant fear and not knowing how to escape because she had 3 young children and no money of her own. But the journals also revealed something worse. His grandmother described suspecting that his grandfather was also abusing their daughter, his mother. Not sexual abuse from what the journals indicated, but physical violence and emotional abuse. His grandmother wrote about her guilt and shame that she couldn't protect her daughter, that she was too afraid, and trapped to intervene effectively. There were also newspapers in the trunk, specific editions that had been saved. After reading the journals, he understood why. The newspapers were from the week his grandfather died. The official story had always been that his grandfather died from a sudden illness, a heart attack or aneurysm, something quick and unexpected. But one of the newspapers had a small article about a police investigation into a sudden death that was later ruled to be from natural causes. The article was vague, but combined with the journals, a different picture emerged. In one of the final journal entries, dated just days before his grandfather's death, his grandmother wrote about reaching a breaking point. She didn't explicitly say she was planning anything, but the entry had a tone of finality and desperation. Then the journals stopped. He didn't know what to think. Had his grandmother killed his grandfather? The death had been ruled natural causes, so maybe he was reading too much into it. But the timing was suspicious, and his grandmother had clearly had motive. He showed his mother the journals, and his mother's reaction confirmed his worst fears. She broke down completely, said she'd hoped this would stay buried, and admitted that yes, she'd suspected for years that her mother had poisoned her father. His mom said that when she was a teenager, living in that house of fear and violence, her mother had grown increasingly desperate. Then one day, his grandfather got sick. He died within 24 hours. The doctor said it was a sudden cardiac event, attributed it to his heavy drinking and smoking. But his mom said she'd seen her mother's face, seen something in her eyes that made her suspect the truth. She'd never asked directly, never wanted to know for sure. His grandmother never confirmed it, and they lived with that unspoken possibility between them for decades. After his grandfather died, his grandmother had become a different person. Lighter, happier, more present. She'd eventually remarried to a kind man who treated her well. She'd been a loving grandmother to him and his siblings. The years of trauma had slowly healed, even if the scars remained. His mom said she'd forgiven her mother years ago, if there was even anything to forgive. Her father had been a monster who'd made their lives hell. If her mother had taken action to save herself and her children, his mom couldn't condemn her for it. But now, he had to live with this knowledge. His grandmother, who'd baked him cookies and taught him card games, might have been a murderer, or she might not have been, and they were wrongly accusing her based on suspicious timing and desperate journal entries. He didn't know whether to feel sympathetic or horrified. If his grandmother had killed his grandfather, it would have been in self-defense after years of abuse, protecting herself and her children. But it was still potentially murder, still a line crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. And what was he supposed to do with this information? His grandmother was dead. His grandfather had been dead for over 40 years. There was no justice to be served, no closure to be found, just this terrible knowledge that his family history was darker than he'd ever imagined. He decided to burn the journals. He and his mom agreed that there was no point in keeping them, no reason to let anyone else stumble across them. If his grandmother had killed his grandfather, she'd lived with that secret for the rest of her life. And maybe that was punishment enough. His siblings don't know. His extended family doesn't know. It's just him and his mom carrying this secret now. And sometimes he thinks about his grandmother's funeral, how everyone talked about what a sweet lady she was, how she'd overcome hardship to build a good life. All of that was true, but it wasn't the whole truth, and he has to live with knowing that the grandmother he loved might have crossed the most serious line there is, even if she had reasons that made it understandable. The secret destroyed his image of his family history, but exposing it would serve no purpose except causing pain. So he keeps it buried, just like his grandmother did for all those years. Alright, these are the 6 stories that caught my eye. If you enjoy the video, consider liking and subscribing, but you can unsubscribe anytime, so no pressure. Peace.